Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. So, today I wanted to just briefly talk about three things that came up in the news recently that all pertain to the Palestinian Israeli conflict or the Israeli genocide of Palestinians and reaction to it and the growing protest movement against it. So, first of all, I just wanted to highlight kind of a symbol of the growing resistance to and the mainstreaming of resistance to Israel's onslaught in Gaza, which it's been certainly very strong throughout the past nearly 8 months, but it's, I think, kind of exploded and gone mainstream and reached a turning point in recent weeks as Israel has invaded Rafah, where over 1 million people have taken refuge. Rafah's population prior to the last few months was much, much less than the approximately 1.3 million people that were there at the time Israel launched its invasion of Rafah, and I guess several 100,000 people have fled now. I think I heard on Electronic Intifada yesterday that it was something like 900,000 have left. So if that's accurate, then there's still about 400,000 people there being bombed by Israel with this horrific incident that received widespread publicity where Israel deliberately targeted a tent encampment in that area. Of course, making the excuse that they were targeting Hamas members who were there, when in reality, they haven't shown any evidence that that was the case. And the bombs or missiles or what have you that were dropped on the tent encampment ignited flammable materials such as gas cylinders in the tents, which created a raging inferno. And last I heard, burned about 50 people to death and injured a couple hundred others. And so, anyway, this prompted the denunciation of Israel's genocide in a number of quarters that we haven't seen previously. And an interesting example of this was the display of a Palestinian flag in the French Parliament, among other places, and what that led to. Oops, sorry. I don't know why that happened. Oh, yeah, I do. Okay, never mind. Okay, this was the scene in the French Parliament uh, Tuesday, I believe it was.
Vous avez un rappel à l'ordre avec inscription au procès verbal jusqu'à saisine du bureau. C'est inadmissible.
There's the chair of the parliament looking very outraged that there's somebody displaying a Palestinian flag in the parliament.
La séance est suspendue.
And of course, he's removed. And stop this. I'm not sure. Okay. Oh, there we go. There's the menu. So that was the scene. And prior to that, the woman you see pictured here, who was I assume a fellow um, party member of the man Sebastien Delongo, who brandished the flag, gave a speech. Um, Monsieur Delongo was, I'm not sure how you say that name, Delongo, uh, was expelled from Parliament by the Parliament's president for 15 days. Uh, and anyway, the woman you see in the picture there gave a very awesome speech just prior to this that I wanted to play for you, and I'll try to translate with my not quite fluent French. Okay, I believe it's here actually. I thought I bookmarked it, but okay. So I'll try to translate as we go along here. But you don't even know French to understand is what one person's comment on this was. She talks about in the course of the International Court of Justice ordering Israel to cease its offensive on Rafah. 50 people were killed due to the bombardment of a refugee camp in Rafah. An infant was decapitated. The Rafah hospital has stopped functioning, and people were burned to death in the city by the bombing. So for the past 8 months, the world has looked on as 2 million people have lived in hell. They've been living in this hell without access to food, water, medicine, and being bombed. The victims, sorry, have been shown in video in real time. The Hunger Games is not just I guess a show. It's a reality on the phones of our teenagers. During these 8 months, we haven't had any sanctions against the assassins. Worse yet, on the night when the assault on Rafah took place, the French Prime Minister dined with uh, officials from Israel, and you have given them a blessing. Okay, I guess that must be Macron, the Prime Minister. No, that person's too young to be Macron. I'm not sure. He's preferred to dine under candlelight with the perpetrators of the genocide. They're taking selfies with propagandists for the Israeli military, losing the last Instagram of dignity. While Norway, Spain, and Ireland recognize the Palestinian state. You've dared to place France in the camp of the accomplices. J'ai mal, that's not an expression I've heard before, but she's basically saying she is ashamed of her France as a. I am ashamed of France basically for allowing people to be lit on fire. Um, so basically, French democracy has been dragged through the mud. Its name besmirched by their support for this genocide, by the government support for it. So she's demanding that the French government cease economic relations with Israel and blue cask. I'm not sure. Okay. Anyway, so very passionate speech there. And so the gentleman who hoisted the flag in Parliament was given sort of, a hero's welcome by protesters outside. And there were many other displays of Palestinian flags. So here at the Women's uh, Champions League, which is championship of the European Football League, in the final between, I'm not sure what team OL is, and Barcelona. Some people came on the field and put up a "Stop the Genocide" banner with colored in the colors of the Palestinian flag. But here's the oddest thing of all. Oops. Bookmarks is not very user friendly. Look at what's on the lapel of this president of the French Parliament who uh, expressed outrage at the MP displaying the Palestinian flag. She's got an Israeli flag on her jacket. So the hypocrisy of these people was just unbelievable. It's beyond words. Um, okay, well, let's move on to another topic here. So also wanted to talk about this pier that the Biden administration constructed, that the U.S. military constructed on the coast of Gaza. So, as Richie Medhurst uh, described it, the pier built by American invaders in Gaza has been washed away. God is great. So, what the U.S. did was they constructed this $320 million pier along the coast of Gaza, which they purported to be a channel through which to bring in humanitarian aid, food, and so forth to the beleaguered, starving people of Gaza. And what they neglected to or deliberately avoided telling people was that at maximum capacity, bringing in aid through the sea to this pier could only bring in a tiny fraction of the amount of humanitarian aid that Gaza needs or that was coming in prior to Israel cutting off aid coming in or strictly limiting it shortly after October 7th. And of course, this pier was so flimsily constructed that a relatively mild storm in the Mediterranean Sea wound up washing a good bit of it away. And the comedy of errors continued when two Navy ships tried to basically rescue the pier and bring it back, and both of them ran aground. But people have suggested that the real reason for the pier had nothing to do with bringing in humanitarian aid. And obviously, when you think about it, it's basically just a form of propaganda to construct this pier and claim that it's addressing the famine and other aspects of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, to construct this pier that can bring in only a limited amount of aid, rather than if you actually cared about the Palestinian people, and we all know that the U.S. government does not, you would put pressure on Israel to open up the border crossings so that the 1,000 or so truckloads of aid that Gaza needs, it was about 500 trucks per day of humanitarian aid coming in before October 7th. But they need a lot more than that now. And instead, Biden and his henchmen built this pier and pretended that this was a way of addressing the humanitarian situation in Gaza. But what is the real purpose of Biden's Gaza port? Tamara Nassar from Electronic Intifada asks. So she talks about how ship bringing aid, 200 tons of aid came in, but it's nowhere near what Gaza needs. Biden in March announced plans to build a temporary pier off the Mediterranean coast of Gaza to establish a maritime corridor of aid between Gaza and the rest of the world. Tonight, I'm directing the U.S. military to an emergency mission to establish a temporary pier in the Mediterranean on the coast of Gaza that can receive large shipments carrying food, water, medicine, and temporary shelters. A temporary pier will enable a massive increase in the amount of humanitarian assistance getting into Gaza every day. I guess compared to next to nothing, it would be, but even that is basically a lie, because it omits the fact that Gaza needs a lot more than that, than what the pier could bring in. Plus, it turns out, I don't have a link for you on this, but it turns out that very little aid actually came in between the time period when the pier was completed and the time when the storm came up and basically put it out of commission for the time being. And not only that, but most of that aid was actually not even actually distributed as of the date when the pier was washed away. Uh, the ironic thing about this is that Israel actually approved of this plan to uh, construct this pier, and they're the ones that are deliberately starving Palestinians in the first place. So, uh, you have to know that uh, if Israel's endorsing it, it's obviously a fig leaf to cover for their and the U.S. government's restriction of aid coming into Gaza to the point that people are starving and otherwise miserable, going without medical aid that is so badly needed by, for instance, people suffering from diseases like cancer and diabetes and so forth who can't get adequate treatment because of this blockade. Uh, the Jerusalem Post said the maritime corridor plan, so a plan basically to construct this pier as well as a road cutting across the Gaza Strip and winding up at the pier as well as connecting up with um, one of the entry points to Israel on the other side of the Gaza Strip. They said it's Netanyahu's idea. Netanyahu had reportedly first proposed the plan to Biden in October and pressed the issue again with the U.S. president in January. So this was Netanyahu's idea, just like the decision to cut off aid to Gaza in the first place, closing all the entry points and only under pressure, allowing limited amounts of aid in later. And that was the Netanyahu government's idea too. So it's obvious that this is a fraud. So Tamara asks, why would Israel, the engineer of the Gaza famine, endorse the idea of establishing a maritime corridor for aid to address a crisis it initiated and is now worsening? This might appear paradoxical if one were to assume the primary aim of the maritime corridor is to deliver aid. Analysts have speculated this could be a ploy to eliminate Egypt as an outlet between the Gaza Strip and the rest of the world and serve the coastal enclave's reliance on Egypt the reliance on Egypt economically and politically by way of the Egyptian-controlled Rafah crossing, the sole point of exit and entry for most people in Gaza. So, people in Gaza, with the permission of the Israeli government, are allowed to leave Gaza and come back into Gaza. If the Israeli government decides it's okay, and that's where they cross. This was ostensibly complete Israel's control of the Gaza Strip without dependence on Egyptian cooperation, reliable as it may have been. Abdel Bari Atwan, a Palestinian journalist, suggested that constructing this pier would create a pathway for the forcible evacuation of Palestinians by sea. Other possible motives for the pier were suggested by Richard Medhurst. And he's done a number of videos on the economic motivations for Israel's attack on Gaza and the U.S. support for it. So Richard says the U.S. claims no boots on the ground while sending 1,000 troops to Gaza, that and a company owned by a former CIA officer. The joke is that they will set up a floating pier to deliver quote unquote aid. What they're really interested in is Gaza's gas and building a rival Suez Canal. If you remember back in September, Netanyahu appeared before the UN and showed a quote unquote map of Israel that had incorporated what's often referred to as Greater Israel, where Gaza and the West Bank were erased from this map, and large parts of Syria and Lebanon were also incorporated into it. But anyway, a couple of years ago, massive natural gas fields were discovered off the coast of Gaza, and there have been long-term plans dating back to the 60s to try and build a canal that would go through Gaza that would compete with the Suez Canal. So I'll refer to you to his video to elaborate on this, explain it in more detail. But anyway, there are all sorts of speculations about possible motives for the construction of this pier. Any or all of which may be true, but what is obviously true is that it was never intended as a meaningful attempt to deliver aid to people in Gaza, which is obvious from the fact that the Israeli government came up with this idea in the first place, the same government that is deliberately preventing humanitarian aid from coming into Gaza in anywhere near the needed quantities. That they probably would have kept it cut off completely if they could have gotten away with that. Okay, the last thing I wanted to talk about today was the censorship of or elimination of candidacy of a Labor Party candidate who happens to be, I believe she's Muslim, who was critical of Israel's policy in Palestine. Actually, what it amounted to was she liked some social media posts that were critical of Israel's actions, both prior to and after October 7th. So Faiza Shaheen, who is set to stand for Labor, describes hearing that her candidacy has been pulled over liking a series of tweets in which she claims Labor said would frustrate its campaign. Okay, so let's play a little interview with her here.
You got an email tonight. When?
Just like an hour ago.
Saying.
So basically, suddenly I'm at the I'm out campaigning and my phone's blowing up. They've briefed the press. They briefed the press before they even had the decency to call me and talk to me. There was a meeting yesterday. My baby cried through half of it, so I don't know how they came to a decision because I couldn't even hear their questions. 14 tweets since 2014, 10 years. 3 of those were like about the Green Party, me liking my friend's tweet before I joined the Labour Party. And one of them was about my experiences of Islamophobia in the party. Like, how am I not allowed to talk about my experiences of Islamophobia and the double standards that I've seen and that we see with Diane Abbott, for instance? I honestly, I'm just so shocked right now to be treated this badly after being such an active member of the party. And, we were one of the tiny number, 6 Tory-held seats in 2019 that had to swing to Labour. To act like I am some kind of person that can't that isn't good at elections, that that frustrates the Labour's purpose.
Okay, so not only was she removed as a candidate for liking social media posts that criticize Israel, but apparently also, as she says there, she was removed as a candidate for talking about her own experience as a Muslim who suffered from discrimination, from Islamophobia. So, all around, this whole thing is just shocking and absurd, and really shows that, in terms of its attitude toward Muslims and its support for Israel for the most part, in terms of the Israel-Palestinian issue, the Labour Party in the UK is just as bad as the Conservatives. One social media post that she liked that got particular attention was this one pertaining to a skit that Jon Stewart did about how anytime you criticize Israel, the knives come out for you from supporters of Israel. So this was actually a skit that appeared back when Stewart had his previous incarnation of the Daily Show. So let's watch this skit. It's kind of funny. Okay, why can't I share the tab? There it goes. Okay, I guess I was mistaken. That actually was a segment on his recent incarnation of the Daily Show that came out after October 7th, and it parodies the way that you can't criticize Israel in any way without being called anti-Semitic, and of course, Jon Stewart himself is Jewish, so Jews who criticize Israel are called self-hating Jews, and obviously the entire narrative that people who criticize Israel are anti-Semitic, or if they're Jewish, self-hating Jews, is itself arguably anti-Semitic, because of course Palestinians are Semitic people. They speak a Semitic language. They're from the region of the world where those sorts of languages are spoken, and simultaneously kind of implies that people who that Jewish people who aren't firmly supportive of Israel and go along with everything Israel does are somehow not real Jews. So this is the narrative that uh, has really stifled discourse about this issue for a long, long time, and led, of course, to Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party campaign for Prime Minister in the UK being derailed by these made-up allegations of anti-Semitism against him and other left-wing members of the Labour Party for their criticisms of Israel. But thankfully, the tide seems to be turning. The actions of Israel over the past 8 months have been just so outrageous and beyond the pale, and have received so much worldwide attention, with as someone was referring to in one of the things I posted earlier, this genocide is appearing on the cell phone screens of every teenager in the world, or everybody else for that matter. So it's really much more difficult to ignore than previous genocides, such as the one in Rwanda, let's say, that have received substantially less publicity. And of course, as an American, I and many other Americans see our tax dollars being squandered in the tens of billions for to support this genocide. And as with the Pier in Gaza, a lot of this money that our taxes are giving to Israel is basically being just sort of washed away. It's being wasted because certainly the only thing Israel is going to be able to accomplish with its war on people not only in Gaza but in the West Bank, on Palestinians in general, is they're just going to cause a lot of death and suffering of all sorts on a scale even greater than it was before last October. But they're not going to be able to defeat Hamas. That's never really been their objective. They're not going to get the hostages released without a ceasefire. The only time when Israeli hostages have been released, or some of the thousands of Palestinians held in administrative detention illegally by Israel have been released. So it's just obvious to an increasing number of people that not only is what Israel is doing like the most profoundly immoral thing you can do, but it's doomed to failure. They're not going to achieve anything beyond maybe, well, not maybe, but pretty much certainly disgracing themselves on the world stage and decimating their economy, and calling into question Israel's existence as a state. So certainly the efforts to censor people who speak out against Israel are going to continue because the ruling elites of the Western world, as well as in Israel, are not going to give up on this project to dominate the so-called Middle East for the sake of various economic interests. But conversely, as we see with the symbolism of the Palestinian flag being displayed in French Parliament, and I believe there's another governmental body where the same thing happened. I think it was Italy. The Palestinian flag displayed on the field, and just protests against this support for genocide breaking out all over the world, as well as a growing number of universities, for example, divesting in response to students' pressure from Israel. Israel is growing increasingly isolated, and so is the United States. And unfortunately, for those of us who live in those countries, it's going to mean the demise of our country's reputations to an even greater extent than in the past, and perhaps some severe economic consequences. But anyway, although unfortunately, yeah, this genocide is probably going to continue for a while. We'll see tremendous loss of life continuing in Gaza, and to a lesser but still significant extent in the West Bank, and all kinds of suffering by millions of people. I think in the long run, the fight for justice, for Palestinian statehood, for democracy in that part of the world, and maybe elsewhere as well, is going to be successful, assuming that nobody blows the world up first. So, I find the point that we have reached with this movement to be really inspiring and hopeful, and I think it's only going to grow from here. All right. Well, free Palestine, and I will see you next time.